Have you ever noticed the little voice in your head saying, "Don't mess this up," right before a big meeting? That voice isn't just an annoyance. It may actually be sabotaging your performance. Research shows that the way we talk to ourselves is actually rewiring our brains, changing the way we think and act. The good news is we can improve and evolve our mindset much like a muscle. In this episode, I sit down with psychologist, researcher, and author Dr. Rachel Turow to explore the science behind self-talk and how it affects conversation performance, all the way from sales to the conversations that we have with friends and family. You'll learn why 94% of our thinking is routine, and that most of that thinking is negative, and how this habitual thinking impacts how you filter every conversation you have. Did you listen to talk or listen? Did you seek to understand the other person's perspective? Did you ask the tough questions? If you're ready to understand how your mindset impacts the most basic conversation skill sets and how it might be holding you back, and most importantly, what you can do to perform at a higher level, this conversation with Rachel is a can't miss. Let's get started. Rachel, I'm very excited to have you. Read the book, the self-talk workout. I know you've written many more and you've been published everywhere, right? That's so cool. My first question though, just how did you get into this particular, I don't know if you call it a science or if you call it a psychology, but this idea of, right, reframing our inner dialogue? Because I know from our experience how powerful it is. So I'd love to hear a little bit, and I know my listeners would, about how you gravitated toward this part of the business.
Sure thing. So I'm a psychologist, and there's a few parts to that. I am a researcher. I have a part of my training and experience that involves researching what's going on for people and how it affects their stress and mental health. I'm also an educator, and then I'm a therapist. So I've sat with a lot of patients. And what I started noticing was that patients felt bad about feeling bad. So it wasn't just the issues that they were bringing into the therapy room, like stress or depression or trauma. They felt really bad for being depressed or anxious or traumatized. And when you're learning to become a therapist, there's an idea and some research that self-criticism, feeling bad about yourself, is a common part of depression. So I sort of had that in mind already. Okay, how people treat themselves, and if they feel bad about themselves, hate themselves, criticize themselves, judge themselves, that's part of depression often. But what I didn't expect was to see it in most patients. Almost everybody felt bad about just having normal human feelings, whether it was a severe mental health issue or just kind of normal stuff. And then I got really curious about this. It started out as sort of an annoyance, like, oh, they feel so bad about being here, or about having these feelings. We can't even talk about the feelings because they're just feeling so bad about having them. But as a researcher, I really dug into the literature. I was like, well, what is there out there on this? And what I found was actually a pretty robust scientific literature. And that literature explained, through various research studies, that actually self-criticism worsens almost any mental health condition. It impacts addiction. It impacts eating disorders. It impacts suicidal behavior, anxiety, depression, stress, whatever you've got. If you're upset at yourself for having it and judgmental about it, it's going to be worse. So I thought that was really interesting information, that self-criticism is actually transdiagnostic. The way that you relate to yourself sort of supersedes all of these different conditions. And then it becomes this amazingly interesting treatment opportunity. So if self-criticism makes everything worse, then if you work on reducing self-criticism, self-judgment, self-hatred, the evidence shows that that makes a lot of things better.
I'm sure there's degrees, right, on all of this, right?
That's right.
And so when I think about self-criticism, I want to ask you, You know, in the business world, right? Someone gets ready for a meeting and they start thinking to themselves, hey, don't mess this up. Don't say something stupid. Don't ask something silly. Don't look foolish. Or I need to make sure they know how smart I am, or I need to make sure they know my experience. Are those kind of forms of self-criticism too?
I think they can be. And I don't mean to imply that self criticism is always bad. I think there's certain types of self criticism that could be constructive or growthful. And those are the kinds that are very focused. For instance, if you were a golf player, if you're really focusing on, hey, I'm not holding the club quite right. I need to change my grip. And I'm going to be really critical on how I'm doing that and try to get a better grip that's going to serve me better and improve my game. I think that's fine. The problem with self criticisms is when it starts being a little bit more global and mean, saying to yourself, you got to do this, or you're bad at this, or, don't screw it up. That's not nice. That's not helpful. That's not like, oh, right, I've got to make sure that I talk about that one thing because that's really important. I think that would actually be really helpful. Like, oh, I missed it last time. I want to make sure I get that point in. So I think it can be helpful, but it's just sort of the default for a lot of people. And another issue is I think there's this common misperception that it's actually helpful, that if you're mean to yourself, it'll make you more motivated and more productive. It's that sort of idea of the drill sergeant getting the best results. And if you're not mean to yourself, well, then you're lazy. And the evidence does not support that. The evidence, the science shows that if you're more encouraging to yourself, you're going to get better results.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked prior to this, obviously, and one of the things that fascinated me about your work is, right, we do it all the time, right? We look at these tasks that we have to do, and our self-talk is, I have to do that, or I got to get to this, and I got to stop blowing that off, and I've got to spend more time on this. And then it just kind of feels like this giant weight. So, right, when I started reading about your work, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting how you help people reframe. And now it's a process. I want to be careful to our listeners. This isn't some magic pill, but you help people start to reframe that inner dialogue, right?
Is helpful if it's more of a conscious process, that if you kind of notice that you have a default habit of being critical or mean towards yourself, that usually can't change overnight just by intention or insight. So it's actually, you could think of it as muscles that you're not using, or really it's brain circuitry that you haven't been using. The brain circuits involved in criticizing yourself are very well developed. They're strong, they fire quickly, they're efficient, but maybe the other ones are a little deconditioned. So it might take some time and energy to practice saying to yourself something that's more encouraging. And it's just so easy to do the flip. Like, I like to do a certain amount of push-ups every morning. I like to do 40. Today I only did 10. I could kind of feel bad about that, and that could kind of, send me down a not so helpful spiral. So it takes a little bit of conscious effort to say, hey, I'm glad I got those 10.
Definitely. You said something about the brain, and I'd like to dive into that a little bit. So I've read some of the research, and I know it varies, but some of the research I read has suggested that 94% of our thinking's routine, or up to 94, and some of it has also suggested that up to about 85 or 80% of that is negative routine thinking.
Right. So that repetitive routine, negative thinking is incredibly common. And sometimes we use the word rumination, where you find yourself kind of going over your greatest hits. We all have them. We tend to think about the same things we thought about yesterday and the day before. And some of that can be helpful. Maybe, you've got to pay your bills. Yeah, you got to get those in the mail. You got to get it done. There might be something that is bothering you, you're trying to figure out in your life. So some of it's necessary. I don't think it's realistic or even, um, something we would want to completely get rid of that part of our minds or that activity. The issue, though, is that too much rumination is a risk factor for depression. And that default mode network, the parts of your brain that are involved in that negative thinking, um, default mode network activity can change. The proportion of time that your mind spends with that repetitive negative thinking, that actually can change with practice. And another brain network people are talking about is the task positive network. That's when you feel like you're in the flow, in the zone, you're being productive, things are feeling focused and creative, and engaging that part of your mind more often can lead to more positive mental health outcomes.
Yeah, you talk about both in one of your books, especially both of those, but the default mode network, which is just right. That's our innate reaction, right? That's just our innate thinking and how we filter and maybe decode what's happening without really thinking it through.
It's hard to tell for sure whether it's innate because none of us can be taken out of our environments. Maybe perhaps we learn that through the people around us. So it's less clear how it develops, although there is some evidence that an environment that's critical does contribute to your own self-criticism. So people who have experienced abuse, racism, homophobia, environments with a lot of pressure, stress, criticism, they're more likely to absorb that and to kind of keep it going in their own minds, unfortunately. And that can happen even if you know that that mistreatment was wrong. And it can take some effort to actually learn a new way of relating to yourself. And it might even seem weird or corny at first. But what you find is that there are a lot of, smart, well-meaning people out there who say, I want to change my mindset. I want to be more positive. I want to be nicer to myself. And I love hearing that. I'm like, great, that's wonderful. But it doesn't seem to happen automatically. The intention alone doesn't seem to make that happen any more than it would work if I would say, I would really like my abdominal muscles to be much more toned. It's nice, but you actually have to do the exercises most of the time to get that kind of result.
Yeah, so that's the challenge, I think, and you nailed it. It's that we kind of live in a world of immediate gratification, and if I go into a business meeting and I think to myself, okay, do a really good job here, Dan. Make sure you can communicate your expertise and make sure you might be able to get them to see your value because it'd be great to get another meeting. That's my self-talk, correct?
That's right. That's how you're relating to yourself in the moment, either with words or even if that was just your general feeling, even if you didn't verbalize it.
Yeah. And whether words are verbally or written, right? I'm going to go into that meeting kind of with that predisposition. That's I'm going to filter and decode things potentially in that meeting, what I hear and what I observe through that self-talk, right? Because that's what I've already established with myself, right? Hey, go get in there, show your value, create that value, right? Get them to like me or get them to see my value, want to do some business with me. I'm going to then kind of hear and ask questions all based off of that premise. Correct?
I think that's quite likely. So, that habit, the way that you're relating to yourself in that moment, like, okay, I got to get this done. I need to get another meeting. If that is the dominant inner voice that's happening, you might be less likely to pay attention to other things that could actually contribute to your success. And I really appreciate the way, Dan, that you frequently mention curiosity, because curiosity is such an effective antidote to a judgmental default way of thinking. I mean, we're just kind of go through the world. I like this. I don't like that. I'm good at this. I'm bad at that. And that kind of thinking, it's just so limiting and it prevents connection. It can prevent productivity. It's hard to get anything done, in your work if you're judging yourself all the time as you're trying to execute it. So, I mean, I think it would be really interesting to experiment. Okay, I've got 2 meetings this week. The first one, at least, I'm going to try to come at it from, as you would say, Dan, a place of more abundance, thinking, hey, I like meeting people. It's kind of interesting to, find out something new about these folks I didn't know before. And, I've had a lot of meetings, I have a lot of experience. So I'm confident that something good can happen here, even if they don't wind up engaging with me. Maybe they, will refer me to a different connection. Maybe something positive will happen. But I'm just interested in getting to know their perspective more, and I have this confidence that I have enough experience and enough to offer that I don't need to be focused on that during this meeting. I can just be interested in them and this new potential idea that we're exploring.
I appreciate you referencing the abundance. I do. I know there's degrees. So, right, one human being could be very scarce in their life, right? Which is very tight, has to control everything. Anything outside of their perceived control, a no-go, right? And so they're very scarce and they hang on really tight. And then there's others who aren't as much. When you think of the degrees and the differences of the human beings, the people you've counseled and all that, some it takes more work than others, right? Sorry, it took me so long to ask that question, but right, some it just really takes longer, and some it doesn't, and it just depends on a little bit of their kind of hard wiring.
It's so hard to tease apart what is kind of intrinsic to somebody's personality or biology and just how they are. And, as we're talking about somebody being nervous, say in a meeting, or putting a lot of pressure on themselves, I can't help but think of just people, therapists or consultants who are just newer to their industry. I think the first year, yeah, you probably are going to be nervous. It'd be weird if you weren't nervous when you're doing something new, and that actually judgment about being nervous could make it worse. If you could be really accepting, like, yeah, this is new territory for me. Like, I'm going to have all these feelings and let's get in there. I'll try to have my feelings, but also pay some attention to them. That might be the best you could do in your first year, is to try to be calm and accepting about not being calm, being concerned. And normalizing, I think, is so key. If you can kind of normalize those feelings, like, yeah, it's normal, I would feel that way. You might even try a both and perspective. Maybe you really do want that deal really badly, or maybe you're really struggling financially. Maybe there's a reason that you're putting so much pressure on yourself in that moment.
Right.
Maybe you got a bad performance review and, I don't know what the situation is. There might be a reason. And maybe it's possible to kind of make room for those feelings. Like, yeah, I do have some fear there. And I still think I have a little room to be curious and interested in this potential client and be in the room in a different way. And even if it doesn't go well, I'm still, there's still good things about life.
Yeah, so I love the term normalizing. I don't really know if I've ever heard it. So my interpretation of that is like what happened to me today, where I had this webinar and fully prepared and very excited, and I don't know, 70 or so people on, and got into it and was really right. I felt like I had good energy and all that. And a certain amount of time into it, I get pinged that my screen's not being shared. They can see me, but they can't see the slides. And so, right, normalizing is me saying, okay, I wish I had that back, and I wish I went that went different, but can't change it. And the other part of the meeting or the webinar went really, really well. So just kind of move forward from there. Is that like normalizing where I'm?
Exactly. Because if you judge yourself for having a reaction, that I think that would be really unreasonable, because we would all feel the same way that you did, Dan. We'd be disappointed, and it's happened. I mean, it's happened to me for sure. I said something wrong, or I forgot something, or the tech didn't work the way I wanted it to. And people have marked me down because, during one presentation, the audio cut out, or I didn't charge my laptop, so I had to pause and plug it back in. So, this stuff happens, absolutely. So I like to use the phrase making room for things, because we don't only have to have one feeling. There's no necessity for restrictions. So you could be disappointed, and you could also let yourself acknowledge that there were a lot of good parts of your presentation as well, that they still heard you, they still got to engage with the themes, even if they didn't have all the visuals that make it as effective as it can be.
What I'm hearing is just trying to give yourself permission to, cut yourself a little slack.
It's true. I think when I talk about self-talk, so a lot of people kind of rush to form the phrase positive self-talk, because that's kind of in the zeitgeist, right? We all want positive self-talk. And I actually tend not to use that phrase because I just think it's so vague. I think it could mean anything. I think it could mean fortune telling, like I am going to get this deal. I'm totally sure. It could mean I'm so wonderful. I'm the best, presenter ever. Now, neither of those things, as far as I know, have any research evidence that they're effective. But there are other forms of self-talk where we do have research evidence that they are effective. And so some of those include reappraising the situation. So trying to see the same situation in a different way. So, for your situation, your example where, they didn't have the visuals, this is an interesting opportunity maybe to think of, well, how effective can you be on audio alone, or to acknowledge the impact of, what you did deliver. So you're kind of looking at the same situation in a different way. And that skill, the fancy term cognitive reappraisal, is associated with less depression. So it's a great skill to cultivate.
So I want to jump into that. Cognitive reappraisal. So is this an example? Prospecting, business development, outreach, whatever you want to call it in the business world is stressful for people because they have to take a risk and reach out, and the person they're reaching out to may or may not accept the invite to talk. So it's pressure. And a lot of times what our clients do and so forth is they'll put like 2 hours on their calendar, say on a Wednesday afternoon, and they'll say prospecting. And just the word prospecting signals to them risk, rejection, exposure, 2 hours of really hard work, 2 hours of putting myself out there, and I may not get anything in return. But what we have found is sometimes for some people, not all, the slightest adjustment there instead of saying prospecting on the calendar, they will put in find my next best client. And sometimes just that change is a reminder, hey, this isn't going to be that bad. Sure, it's tough, but there's a great opportunity here maybe. I might find my next best client. Is that an example?
I think that's lovely. I think that's a really interesting experiment. And, there are a lot of data out there that look at people in aggregate. So you could analyze whether that helped, a group of people that you're advising. But everybody could do these kinds of individual experiments with themselves to, okay, what happens if I do have different words on my calendar? Does it make the experience more pleasant?
And to your point, not all the same words are going to mean the same to everybody. So some people those words may resonate, but others it might have to be something different that resonates, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. So you were talking about,
not at all.
Was it cognitive?
Cognitive reappraisal. And one of the forms, that we talked about in terms of cognitive reappraisal is this exercise called Spot the Success. And it's a nice antidote to the idea that we're not doing enough, we haven't accomplished enough. And I don't think I know anybody who's ever having had a day where they're like, I did absolutely everything I wanted to today. There's nothing left undone. That is unlikely, right, to occur. And it can be this crushing feeling that, oh, I never get as much done as I want. There's all these tasks, haven't done them. It feels really crummy. So, Spot the Success is an exercise where you think about 10 things that you have done today. And the catch is no item is too small. Did you take a vitamin? Did you take a shower? Did you send a text message? All of these things seem like they might not matter, but you can see how they're part of a larger picture of taking care of things, nourishing relationships, helping your body, and that they actually do matter. And so if you can start to see your actions, not just your non-actions, that's the to-do list or the things that are still in progress, but what you have done. I assign this task in my undergraduate psychology classes, so I get a lot of feedback about it. And some students say that they find themselves accomplishing more and feeling more motivated because they're seeing themselves in this light of somebody who does get things done and somebody who is engaged in meaningful actions. So they'll see the same day, but that's that reappraisal. They see it through a different lens of, oh, I thought I didn't get anything done, but actually I did get a bunch of things done. Not everything I wanted, but quite a few things that do matter.
Is Spot the Success something that can build on itself too? Have you seen in your research if someone can just try to be consistent with it, is it something that it builds on itself?
I don't know if I've had somebody use that phrase exactly, but what I've heard from students who practice it over a period of about 4 weeks is that at the beginning, it seemed kind of stupid. It seemed silly, to give myself credit for things like getting out of bed.
Yeah.
But as I did it, as I grudgingly practiced it over a few weeks, it started to sink in. It wasn't silly anymore. I felt myself more willing to actually marinate in it for a minute to say, yeah, I did do that. And it's okay that I'm acknowledging it. And for me, I think sometimes I'm more likely to notice in the moment that if I'm taking the garbage out, it's not just, it's just so annoying, I have to take the garbage out. When can I get to my real work? It's like, good for me. I'm taking the garbage out, and I get to breathe some fresh air for a few minutes. And then I go back to my desk. Like, it's not all bad. It actually feels more pleasant.
So I'm going to go back to, and I may be tying something here that should not be tied together. So it's okay if you tell me that. But I do really like what you said earlier about, and I'll use my words, that the brain is a bit malleable. If you work on something over and over, you are going to strengthen it like a muscle. Now, I know the brain's not really like a muscle, right? It's more pathways. But if you do something like Spot the Success, in a way, is it that you're strengthening your ability to recognize positives maybe at some point down the road more innately? Or am I taking a huge leap and a stretch there?
You're doing great. You're doing great, Dan. Let's see. There's 2 ways that I can go with this. So maybe I'll briefly introduce each one, and you take the one you like better. So if you make a fist with your one fist with one hand, that's your limbic system. Then you put this other hand on top of that. That's your cortex. So this is our brain. The limbic system is very emotional, right? Okay, I need to take care of things. Maybe panicking, something's wrong. The cortex is very thoughtful. Okay, I have a plan. This is my idea of what I'm going to do. These are the steps. And you want these 2 parts of your brain to speak to each other, the cortex and the limbic system. And there are pathways called corticolimbic pathways. And the more you get the practice of actually observing your emotions and managing them in effective ways, you are literally strengthening the connections between those 2 parts. So that's one way of looking at things, those corticolimbic pathways. Those are some of our targets here in doing this, building awareness about how you're relating to yourself. Then another practice, we talked about the default mode network. There's a default mode network. That's your kind of top 40, maybe rumination, stuff you keep thinking about, often
Is that like the
negative.
greatest hits thing earlier, or is that different?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a default mode network. We all have that, but we don't want to stay in it. We want to be able to get out of it and to get into the task positive network. That's in the zone, in the flow. And then there's one other network that you can think about called the salience network. And that's involved in switching between networks. So the more you practice noticing that you're in the default mode network, I'm in default, and switching over, you can actually build that capacity to switch more quickly. If you judge yourself for being in the default mode network, self-criticism, it's going to be a little harder. And this is part of the work of mindfulness meditation. You sit down to meditate, so you're trying to be where your mind wants, you're trying to direct where your mind is. Your mind goes somewhere else. You try not to judge it, and you try to use that salience network. You don't have to try to be like salience network, it's just the automatic process of you switch back. You're switching from default into task positive. Switch back to, default, because your mind is going to go somewhere else. And if you do that 100 times, you're actually training your brain. So this is the work of meditation and why it reduces self-criticism and improves mental health. Your mind goes away, and instead of judging yourself, I'm horrible at meditation. Meditation is terrible. Whatever you may think, this is boring. I hate it. Hard work. Instead of all that, you say, my mind went away, bringing it back. And you can imagine then when you're in high pressure settings, if you have that practice and your mind goes away, you bring it back, and you've done it so many times that it's not too hard.
So you are one of the first, and maybe you are. I've done some crazy fun stuff. Like I've literally gone to the desert for a week and meditated with a Tibetan monk for like 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And it's always about bring yourself back, don't self-criticize. But you're the first person that's actually said, hey, there's kind of a reason you want to bring yourself back. Don't be hard on yourself. Don't judge yourself. Just accept the fact that the monkeys in your brain took off for a few minutes and bring yourself back. Because what you're saying is you're actually strengthening the ability, I'm going to use my word, to ground ourselves maybe in the future. Is that a fair connection?
Absolutely. I mean, meditation is kind of a full body workout. So you're training attention because your mind goes away, you bring it back more efficiently, more quickly, but you're also training non-judgment. So the more you can do that rep without evaluating yourself, then it seems to reduce judgment and to generalize to other settings, so that people who practice mindfulness meditation are judging themselves less overall and having better mental health because of that reduction in self-judgment and improvement in attention.
So as you know, right, we try to teach, very layman's terms, right? But we try to teach people to move and from a mindset that's right now maybe being loaded with scarcity, right? So, hey, don't mess this up. We talked about that earlier. Don't screw it up. Don't say something stupid. Don't ask anything dumb, right? That's scarcity, right? We hold ourselves back. And what we do is we try to teach people how to recognize that and then try to move to abundance, which you mentioned earlier in the brain, which is more, hey, relax. This one meeting's not going to define you. You make a mistake, you're going to be fine. There's not one question that you're going to ask that is going to blow the deal, right? And there's lots of good things happening in your life, right? So we, as you know, we try to teach that with scarcity going to the abundance and attachment going to detachment, and then low intent going to benevolence. And so I'm wondering out loud, right, what you just shared about meditation and how that innately strengthens two things. Sounds like it strengthens your awareness and also the hopefully reduces the lack of judgment, which could strengthen your ability, right, to spark a different pathway in your brain, spark a different thought process. Am I getting that?
Yeah, and it might not be, exactly a spark, but I would say a different network is activated. So a network, people now, neuroscientists are often thinking more about networks of brain regions that tend to work together rather than this brain part is for this brain part is for that. It's like, well, what network of structures seems activated in different tasks? So when you're engaged in that default thinking, whether it's beating yourself up over, your past mistakes, whatever it is, it seems like there's this particular group of structures that are activated. And then when you switch over to thinking about something else that's a little bit more, present mental work where you're engaged in a specific task, it's different. The network is different in terms of activation. So we're trying to activate a different network in our brain than the one that just is activated out of default. And that seems to involve a lot of practice. I want to make the point that one of the realms of research that really fascinated me when I started exploring this area was a study looking at mental habits, looking at self-criticism as a mental habit. So it was a study that had over 1,000 participants. So I feel like pretty confident that they've got something there. It's not just, an anecdote from a few people. But these researchers found that the habitual nature of negative thinking contributed more to depression than the actual content of the thoughts. I find that so fascinating as a therapist because, a lot of us really like to get into the content. You think this about yourself. Why do you think this about yourself? And that's not accurate. Maybe arguing with the person, trying to get them to think differently. But actually, targeting the habit of it might even be more effective. So forget what the thought is, just how much you're repeating it and how much it's arising automatically. That's a major issue. And that's why having a specific practice like Spot the Success or mindfulness meditation, those are excellent ways to kind of reconcile, hey, if you want to change your habits, repetition is necessary. You've got to do the reps. We're talking, thousands of times because those habits are strong and powerful. They aren't something that just came on yesterday. We've had them for years or decades. So, face it, we got to do the reps. It's not just a single on off switch anywhere that I know about.
But I did. I somewhere I picked up that writing stuff down may strengthen the process. I don't know if there's any legitimacy to that, where I could catch myself thinking one thing, right? And then I could say, okay, hold on. No, my only responsibility in this meeting is to determine how and if they need help. I don't owe anybody else anything. But I read somewhere, heard somewhere, I think, that if you wrote that down, there's a possibility that you're actually strengthening that thought a little bit more. Or is that just one of those things that you just, you hear and sounds good, but it really has no substance to it?
Well, I like to be, as scientifically accurate as possible. So I'll have to say, I don't know for sure about the kind of larger question if writing something down strengthens the likelihood that you'll believe it or incorporate it. And there might be literature on that. I'm not sure.
I gotcha.
I do know, though, that writing things down does activate another level of processing. So some people might find that helpful. It's actually kind of a concern these days because students aren't taking so many handwritten notes. And it seems that handwriting, engages a different learning process. So I think that it would be a wonderful way to experiment. I have had people tell me with the Spot the Success exercise that they feel like writing it down has given them more benefit than thinking about it. But that's, again, a few individuals. I wanted also to offer another way of working on these themes, if that's okay, because some people might not like Spot the Success or they might not like mindfulness meditation.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the most well-researched ways to reduce self-criticism is a different form of meditation called loving kindness meditation. And that is silently repeating phrases to yourself over and over again, matched to the breath if you like. Phrases like, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. You could get your own phrases. They don't have to be in English. They could be, stuff that's important to you. But just the research, if you want to look into this on loving kindness meditation, is that it's quite helpful. It's another thing people doubt, like, oh, it sounds kind of corny. And why would repeating these phrases make a difference? And so people are often surprised at the depth of the research. And so it's just one of the most established ways to change your self-criticism over a period of several weeks is repeating these kinds of phrases to yourself. And it's a nice alternative to trying to pay attention to your breath if people don't enjoy that kind of meditation or find it too difficult, or if they just want something else besides the spot the success.
I think for our audience, some of them who know us pretty good, but many don't. Either way, it's hard work, right? I mean, you really got to spend the time. You got to have a little bit of discipline behind it, but it's like anything else. If you're willing to invest the time in some of these techniques, I like to look at it, right, is that you're just strengthening yourself, whether it's for personal relationships, whether it's business relationships, or whether it's just your relationship with you. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. And this is where I really like using the metaphor of physical exercise. I really think that most of us, at least intellectually, understand that our bodies are probably not going to get stronger unless we put in some minutes strengthening them. And I always think if you want a minute to last a really long time, get in a plank position. It'll be the longest, most annoying minute. I wouldn't do it because I like it. The only reason I do it is because I know it's good for me. I know it makes me stronger. So you don't have to like any of this stuff for it to work. And you don't need to do it for that many minutes. But it is a type of training.
Yeah, that's such a great example. Because I don't know anybody that wants to get into a plank for a couple minutes. But you do it and you do it consistently, you're going to get a lot stronger. As we wrap up part one of this conversation with Rachel, I can't help but think about how many people are walking around with a default mindset that's actually working against them. We're so quick to judge ourselves, to label things as good or bad, to get caught up in that scarcity thinking, and we don't even realize we're doing it. But what would happen if you started treating your mindset like a muscle? As you would go to the gym to strengthen your muscles and get in shape, what if you could just take a few minutes each day to practice some of what Rachel talked about? Whether it's spotting your successes, trying meditation, or just trying to get better at self-awareness and catching yourself in the moment when you start that negative self-talk. Until next time, remember, your mindset is malleable. You can improve your mindset one conversation at a time. Progress is always incremental. If you'd like to learn more or connect with Rachel, go to rachelturow.com or check out her book, The Self-Talk Workout. It's a great read with lots of ideas and suggestions. If you enjoyed this episode, you can follow us on your preferred streaming platform. And if you choose, leave a review. You have many options to listen to. We appreciate the time that you spend with us, and we would value your feedback on Apple Podcasts.